Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Q&A this month. And I'm so excited because we have Tara here from A Mother's Intuition podcast. And I'm so excited that she's here to talk with us today. Before I jump into that, I wanted just to say a couple quick things, opening remarks here, because one of the things I wanted to share with everybody is, do you know it was exactly a year ago this month, right around this time, that we actually launched the Highly Intuitive Kids website and this parent group. The parent group was launched just a little bit sooner, but within this year's time, we've been able to bring in different experts and run different activities in the group, from the parent meetups and sharing stories so that we could start to normalize conversations and talking to people in different locations around the world about this. We started our kids meetups. And we're going to continue to grow this even more and more with different activities and information, but it's just to make sure that parents have a resource out there. And I'm so happy that Tara is here today on our 1-year anniversary month to talk about a topic that is really important to discuss. I love the title of our podcast, A Mother's Intuition, and just talking about parents tying into their kids and really understanding what's going on with them. But just also the topic of, children, highly intuitive kids being in distress and what that can look like. That's an important topic. And we want to share that so that folks can understand and look at what signs do you have in your child. And it doesn't matter what age, because this can happen at any age when they get into distress and have these intense emotions. And Tara's going to talk about what happened with her son being as young as 5, as, being suicidal. So I appreciate her coming forward and talking about this and how she turned what happened with her family into, a purpose and a podcast, and to share information with other families of what she learned. Because Tara and I have talked about the fact that there was not a lot of information out there. It was hard to find information on this when she was going through it and when we first started going through it. And so we've both looked at ways that we could take what has happened for our families and turn around and help other families with it. So I just wanted to say that Tara is the creator and the host of the podcast, A Mother's Intuition. And in 2015, her passion for intuitive connection between the parent and child surfaced after a 5-year-old son became actively suicidal. And after a turbulent beginning of realizing her son was in fact highly intuitive, figuring that out, she began her deep education into how to help him. And, after her years of experience and education, she started her podcast, and she's accumulated so much knowledge that I always love highlighting other people who are working and helping families and doing work with highly intuitive children as well. And so she's also, besides the podcast, she does work with families as well, with kids with these intense emotions. And one of the things that I love she's doing right now is, and we'll get her to talk about it and share her story, she's traveling the US in her RV with her family, which I think is pretty cool. So she'll tie all of that in there too. So thank you, Tara. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. I'm so excited that you have me. I'm so excited for this.
Yeah. And, and I will say, when we were putting together the Highly Intuitive Kids website and we were looking for resources and I was pulling things together, yours was one of the videos that I did put up on the website, a clip you did about, I think it was the signs of a highly intuitive child. So that was put up there as a resource for people. But one of the things I want to start with is just open up by having you tell us about your story, how that ties in, and then lead into raising your children. So I'm going to kind of just turn it over and let you start your conversation, and we'll just go from there.
Sure. So we're from Pennsylvania originally, and I come from a pretty supportive family. I come from a lot of girls. So I'm the oldest of 3 girls. My mom's from 4 girls. We have 7 girl cousins. There's a lot of girls. There's a lot of women in this family. And we came up in, I wouldn't say we were a religious family, though my uncle was a pastor. So there was religion in the family, but it was very like flexible and fluid. And the way that he ran like he runs church and stuff like that, is very really deeply seated in unconditional love, honestly. So I had a very good basis, and I have very good system and rocks of people who are just unconditionally loving. And so we weren't big into like the metaphysical or anything like that. I think my mom went to a psychic once as a kid, and I was like, this is cool. Tell me what happened. But other than that, like nothing comes up per se until you kind of start getting later on in life, and you're like, oh, I had a premonition about my husband the night that I met him. I had, that I had, there's different things that I start looking back now and go, oh, it was always there, but it wasn't overwhelming like I would later experience with my own children. So my husband and I got married in 2009, and we're family friends. And we ended up having our son in 2010. And I look, and then our daughter in 2013. And I look back even now in those pregnancies, and his pregnancy, when I was pregnant with him, it was so difficult. I was violently ill the whole time. I was so sensitive. I was very depressed. I had a lot of like prepartum depression, a lot, like to the point that I didn't even tell my husband I was pregnant till I was 12 weeks, because it was just overwhelmed. Like it literally hit me maybe the moment that I got pregnant, honestly. And I just spent so much time in the shower. It wasn't even funny. I just like laid there. And then with my daughter, it was interesting. And so I had him, and then I had postpartum, but I did a very good job of covering it up, even though it was really bad. Then I ended up having my daughter in 2013, and that pregnancy was completely different. It was like, I felt like Buddha. Like I just was calm and understanding. It was weird though. She never moved. I never felt her move once. How they were in utero was very much how, when they would eventually come out and I would learn their personalities, was very much how they are in life in ways. I had this craving. I didn't crave foods. I craved like going clubbing, which was like not like clubbing and club music. And I actually was humongously pregnant and went with my friends to the club. And I was like, why am I here? And she ends up, as she comes out, she is totally that way. She is the calmest, sleepiest person. And then nighttime comes and she street performs. She does nothing more than want to perform. She wants to be out late. She loves loud music, but she's one of the calmest people that I know. So it's so funny how in utero they were already so present, and how I was registering them. So when I had my son, in preschool and everything like that, I would get people saying he's very raw. He's very emotionally raw at the surface. And he was very active, super active. And I found that I was chasing him a lot. He was very loving, but he was also, and very wise. He asked me like crazy deep questions at a very young age, like 2 or 3. He'd be like, do you actually believe in God? And what do you believe? And then I'm sitting there like, what? So it wasn't anything that I overly thought about. I thought it was interesting. I know I had heard from other people that, that children were more connected, but other than that statement, I didn't take it any further than that. And then when our daughter came into the picture, it was very interesting because we lived in an old farmhouse that we had renovated, and all of a sudden I had all this paranormal activity begin. that wasn't there before, really, for the most part. And I mean, we would put the kids down and they're little, and you could hear children running up and down the hallways. And so we'd keep running upstairs thinking we were going to catch a kid running around, not that the baby's not running. And the 2-year-old is, drooling on his pillow. And you would hear these children run up and down the hallway and run into Eve's room, open the door and close the door. And it sounded like they were jumping off a bunk bed. And we would try and catch these children all the time. And she had taken to talking to people around the house, having full-blown conversations. We had dogs that had died, like our personal dogs, and she would be running around the house playing with them. And then she would get annoyed with us. We'd sit there and be like, who are you talking to? And she'd be like, what do you mean? Frank is sitting right there. I don't understand. Like, she was like literally ticked that we could not understand what was happening.
Tara, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
So
Yeah.
when you heard the paranormal activity, was it just you or your husband? Both of you heard it throughout the house?
Yes. Like both of us heard it. And then it went even to the degree of, we had babysitters, right? That the babysitters would end up calling us and say, could you please come home? Your daughter is freaking us out. And like the activity was that apparent. You could, if you were I was laying in bed, you could see, shadow people walking around the room all the time. And so it wasn't just me, and it wasn't just the kids. It could go bigger for my husband, who was not a believer, or skeptic. So, but I'm really grateful that he was there for that, because it set me up as I explored later on down the road. And, my husband's a very supportive person in general, but that still would have been a big thing to bite off when I started like presenting my findings. So, yeah. So, so originally it was my daughter who I wasn't zeroing in on. That's where the clues kind of lied. And my sister had wanted that year to go to a psychic for her birthday. And I said, okay, I'll pay for it and then I'll go. Right. And so I went to the psychic, who ended up being only a few houses down from my mom. And she hadn't been there that long. We didn't know she existed. And so I said, she said, why are you here? What would you like to concentrate on in this session? And I said, I'd like to know why my house is haunted. And she started laughing, and she looked me in my face and she said, it's not your house, it's your daughter. And I was like, my daughter? And so she said, yes, they like her energy. And so that just kind of blew open so many, like my perspective, my mind, everything kind of blew open, right? Like, why would my daughter be able to see that? Why? Just why? And I wouldn't give this psychic anything. She was telling me things and I was going, go on. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's nice. Thank you. I wouldn't let her know anything about my life. And I was either walking out, she said, I sense there's a boy and you're not pregnant. There's a boy. Do you have a son? And I said, yes. And she goes, oh, that makes sense. She goes, he's going to change everything. And I didn't understand. So that is the year of, so then, we were doing preschool and everything like that. And preschool was horrendous. I mean, the preschool teachers were wonderful, but all he was doing was trying to escape preschool. He was overwhelmed by everybody. He fight or flight. I mean, one or the other all the time. And then it came to kindergarten, and I felt so bad because he wanted to be with the children. He wanted to be with them. But what I noticed he was doing was, they couldn't really keep him in school because he kept trying to escape. But he started making kids stay with him when he was around certain adults. And he said, I can't be near you to a certain adult, and said, unless I have another child. And it was an interesting way for him to self-regulate. I'd really have to think about it now to see if he was using the child as a barometer of how to be in that moment, or I felt more like it was like a safety thing, in all honesty. When he started kindergarten, that first month was when he started to actively to try and commit suicide. And what that looked like was stating, I want to go home, and then trying to run out into oncoming traffic. You would try, I like, trigger warning everybody. I won't go into like depths, but this is what the overwhelm would get so big that he just, I couldn't keep him any further than a foot or 2 feet from me at all times, which was exhausting as a parent. Not to mention you're dealing with the, I'm failing as a parent, trying a million different ways to parent. I'm still a new mom, feeling guilt that my daughter is like, I literally like have her strapped to me at all times because I need to be able to run, and nobody understanding, and any instance could have been deadly at that point. Like literally he was getting his hair cut one time and jumped out of the chair and ran out into traffic. So he just would sit down with me and he'd cry and he'd say, I'm sorry, mommy, your life would be so much easier if I wasn't here.
So Tara, can I ask,
Yeah.
so at that point, when he was doing that, you still didn't know that he was highly intuitive. You hadn't connected that all of this was related to heightened sensitivity for him at that point?
That was kind of like the needle that popped the balloon. I would say, like, I had all my clues. For instance, he was very telepathic. And so literally I felt like all the clues, or my awareness of the clues, kind of all happened within a very small few months, kind of out of necessity, right? Like, why would he, you're sitting there and you're like, why would my 5-year-old be actively suicidal when I don't know of him having any trauma, as in, because he's never away from me. I have nothing to, I can't even leave him with anybody other than preschool. So there were things. He was so telepathic that was one of my first steps that I needed to be really aware and deal with, because I was washing the dishes one morning and there were feral kittens out in my yard, like right in the window. And it was like the most adorable. They're like playing in my rose garden with butterflies. And I was in my mind going, I cannot believe how beautiful this day is. And it feels like the worst day of my life. Like my depression was just overwhelming. And just at that moment, he came down the stairs, came around the corner, and he goes, how can this day be so beautiful when it feels like the worst day of my life? And so it was things like that where I was like, I started adding them up, and I realized I had to have, come to terms with myself, was something is going on and he can tap in. I'm just going with telepathy. I hadn't even taken too much to realize that it was also emotions, but maybe I did. That how I was feeling and what I was thinking, he was somehow had tapped into and was taking as his own. And I was overwhelming him. And so I knew that I would need to deal with that sooner than later. And so that was like just one of the many things, but I started noticing he was doing it at family functions. We still are working on that, falling into channel or connecting to other family members and things like that. But when he's I can have a conversation with him now at 12 and be like, okay, let's discern this. Because it's all about discernment and strategy at this point. Discern. But then I couldn't, So
I was going to just, Tara, you're bringing out a lot of really good points too, because I just wanted to add, just for parents to think about this, because like what you're saying, that's just the signs of like a really empathic child is taking on the emotions or the feelings of someone else. And we've had the same thing with Ethan, even like taking him to family events and how he's always finding that corner, and we come from a large family. There's 8 on my side, siblings, and John's side. And when people come together, it's a lot. And when he was younger, it was a lot. So he's always trying to fight. We didn't know why he would scream and cry in being out in locations or group gatherings. And when he started, preschool, it was the same thing. He was just overwhelmed and we didn't know what was going on.
Yep.
One of the things that Ethan used to do that parents can also look out for is he used to go and he would bang his head. He would bang it because he was stressed, and we didn't, and that was before he could start talking. We didn't realize how sensitive he was and how stressed he was feeling. And that was his way of trying to communicate it. We taught him baby sign language, and then that helped with it, but just his overall sensitivity. So those are just some things that parents can keep an eye for, especially the young kids who can't talk. They'll act it out in certain ways, or they'll start saying things that it's that you just need to listen to those cues. There might be something more going on with them.
Yeah. Well, another weird thing that Dominic kept asking his preschool teacher, who I became very good close with, he kept asking her, because he had her actually 2 years in a row because she wanted to keep him close. He kept asking her, is my mommy happy? Mm-hmm. And I mean, I was like good Stepford face. Like I can act with the best of them when it came to that. And then my daughter ended up having the same preschool teacher, and the preschool teacher called me and she goes, we have a problem. And I was not a problem in a mean way. She's like, we got something we got to tackle here. She said, Eve said to me, is my mommy happy? And so she didn't know, but she was like such an advocate in like this, giving me more clues for myself, because, I'm so desperate at this point. My son's like actively suicidal. I am desperate. I'm going to do whatever it takes, but I wasn't in that space before he was. I was just trying to get in line with the mainstream, how I was supposed to parent. He was supposed to be in kindergarten. And another issue was, well, not an issue. I did my last and final attempt. We did an IEP meeting, and they have to get, the therapist has to see them and evaluate them. And we walked into a middle school, and I knew we were already, and I made a vow with myself that I was going to let them see the absolute most honest depiction of him. I wasn't going to get in the way of it and try and, head off things. I was going to let them see the most honest thing, because they were going to need to know what they were going to deal with. And so he walked into the middle school and he started touching the walls. And, I'm kind of like, come on. And he started touching, and he started feeling like they were burning him. I could watch him. He was like, ow, 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 ow. And so I stopped for a second, and I let the therapist watch everything. I said, what's going on? He goes, we have to get out of here. We have to get out of here. They're trapped in here. We have to get out. And like, this is not a conversation we have had. He's 5, nor, there was been no point. And that evaluation went haywire the second he walked into the psychologist's office. And honestly, we started going to other psychologists. I think we went through 12, and they told me, I'm sorry, we don't know how to help you. This is too severe a case, and I don't know what I'm dealing with. And so I knew quite early on that I was kind of on my own, right? I know I was explaining things, and all I was doing was like even the doctor, my pediatrician, God love her. She was so supportive. She's like, I don't know what I'm dealing with, but like, I am in it with you. Like, I'm learning, like I'm here. And I'm just like, and I had my own psychologist who was like that. Like, I feel very lucky that I eventually did find the most amazing group of people to help that said, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I am here and I'm here to learn, you know? We went into one psychologist's office and he did kind of another situation where we couldn't go into cognitive psychology offices where adults had been. We could do play therapy where children had been, because play is a bit different. Play is the working out and the healing. But we walked into cognitive psychologist's office where she saw adult couples and she had very few toys. And he wasn't really allowed to play with them because they were like, you know, Lego structures that were already built. Like, I was like, I don't understand why he said you could see kids. But anyway, and we are talking and she's talking to me about him in front of him, which I found very odd, you know, and he starts walking around the room and I said, oh, we're in for it now. And he starts touching the furniture and touching the walls. And then he fell into channel and he started channeling the people that were in the therapy. So I don't want, and he started, you know, he's 5. I don't want a divorce. I love her. I love her. And then in that moment, he ended up running out and trying to run out into traffic. And so I think I taught a lot of psychologists a lot of things just by sheerly existing.
So what did that therapist do when he started channeling a prior session or a session? What did that person?
Stood there with her mind blown, nothing. And she ended up emailing me the next day and she said, I've never seen anything like this. I don't know what I was watching. It was like coming from a very nice place. I beg you not to go into the hospitals because he's going to change therapists every time he sees one. And from what I saw, if essentially the hospital is going to overwhelm him even more. So I literally was just, everything was taken away. Like when it came to help.
So Tara, did you ever find a intuitive psychotherapist or therapist for him? Because that's something just for parents to know they are out there. And
they're still very rare.
Yeah, but you can ask.
You can ask. No, I never did, but he does have a therapist who is, on the podcast, I interview her a lot, and her name's Liila Briggs, and she's a healing touch practitioner, but she works with them, and that's all. Like, that has been game changer for me and for them.
Well, she was open too, right? I mean, because even if you can't find an actual intuitive psychotherapist, at least somebody who's open to understanding these abilities and being willing to work with a child versus just, you know, putting them in a box.
We also had him go to this intensive sound therapy, and it wasn't play therapy, but it is play therapy. It's coming from the idea of development and occupational therapy, and it was all at once. So we would spend several hours a day for 12 weeks there. And they were so open. They didn't necessarily understand what was going on, but they were the first ones when he got diagnosed, because he got diagnosed with generalized anxiety, sensory processing disorder, RADS, and something else. But I remember I looked at the lady who gave him the diagnosis and I said, what is sensory processing disorder? And she said, imagine you have regular, normal person, and then you have a child who's born and they're like an insect. They can sense everything 1,000 times what we can. So it's very easy to get overwhelmed in regular society. And I said, well, that doesn't sound like a disorder. That sounds like, for lack of a better word, like a superpower. And she looked at me, because she's like in the medical field, she's not really supposed to. And she goes, yes. She didn't say yes, but she was like, yes, that's why I'm here. I'm kind of like quietly in here, understanding. She's like, it's not, essentially it's not a disorder, but it's something we have to, we're going to have to figure out how he's going to be able to thrive. So that was the beginning of all of it. And when I realized that I had to start quilting together stuff, and then I would end up going to the psychic again, with things. And I had finally gotten the word empath, and I had like little things, right? And I went to the psychic, and she goes, I don't know how to help you because I don't work with children. And I was highly intuitive as a child, but not to this degree. And she just handed me a stack of books, and she goes, this is everything I have. I have a whole library. Take whatever you want. And I took the stack of books and I read everything. And then I went and started contacting every author. And I said, I need to know what you know, and I want to work with you, because he's not going to let anybody work with him. But if I learn everything I possibly can, then I may be able to implement it with him. But then it ended up working out differently, and we can go into that. Do you have any? It says, I've started working with all these different intuitives who are at the top of their field and learning. And then what ended up happening is I ended up healing myself. And then the overwhelm started to lessen on him. Mm-hmm. And he was able to start thriving. And just me experiencing that by osmosis. I didn't have, I mean, in certain scenarios I did, but I technically didn't have to sit down and teach these things, because he's already so intuitive and connected that it was just starting to absorb. And the other thing you start noticing is, as you heal, it happens to ripple. So it's rippling to my daughter. It's rippling to my parents. It's rippling. It just starts moving, right? Mm-hmm. But my main concern was how, that I didn't want my kid was going to die. He was, as time went on and as he got older, if I hadn't done anything, or me and my husband hadn't done anything, it was just going to be over.
Can I add, Tara? Because you're bringing up such a big, valid point. We've talked about this before, and I wanted to just make sure that people pay attention to what you said. That's powerful. What you said is, because when you heal yourself, because children who are empathic and they feel the energy and they're sensitive to intuitive and empathic, they feel everything around them. Yeah. They pick up on the emotions. And who are the closest people to them? Their parents. And even though we may think that we're, covering or putting up a good face for them, or like not showing them, they're tapping into that. And one of the best ways that we can do is just what you said, and just why we bring so many experts into the group. Like you said, educating yourself. Education is powerful. That's what helped us as well.
Yes.
With Ethan, after we got on the shows, and then educating, and that's the website and resources out there pulled together for parents to educate themselves. But the more you learn, the more you understand for yourself, and the more you heal yourself, which is beautiful what you did, Tara. And parents, the more you understand and you bring your anxiety down around parenting and what you need to do to support the kids and hold space for them, they naturally start to heal. They naturally start to heal. Yeah, it starts, like you said, it's that ripple effect. So that's why it's important that parents have to educate themselves. And the more you center yourself and ground yourself, you will naturally help to ground your child, because they're looking for you for the comfort and the confidence, and to know that everything's okay. And when you know better and you understand these abilities, it's okay. You just know you have to parent them a little differently, and you can give them what they need that makes them feel safe and comfortable and centered.
Yep.
So that's beautiful what you did, Tara.
Well, it wasn't intentional, it really wasn't. I wasn't intending to heal myself, but maybe, but obviously I was. That wasn't like the first thing that came to mind. And it was interesting. And even now I look back, is the hardest places that he has to control things is in the familial system. So a holiday, a family thing, he's actually pretty good when we get out into the world. And he can figure out the difference. And now he's much older and he has so much more control and more, he's so much more discernment. That was something too, was I had met also, a lot of intuitives who were just like, you just need to make a bubble and then he's going to be okay. And I was like, this is not working for us. And so that's a whole other thing too, is you need to be okay with, you need to be solid in your own intuition, even if you don't feel that you feel people are more quote unquote, intuitive than you are. But there were people I'm like, this isn't helping. This isn't the avenue that I'm going. So why isn't it? So we need to go deeper. Why isn't that bubble helping? What about it energetically? And so, because that bubble needs to change for different reasons. It just can't be white light. Well, I'll probably get like a lot of like backlash in that. Like a lot of people very much are like, make this big ball of white light and they'll forever be protected. In certain scenarios, yes, that really worked for us. But in other scenarios, it created an issue, because when you make yourself more of a beacon that you already are, things gravitate towards you. So it wasn't that it didn't work. It was that, just like in anything in life, it has to change and move, and there has to be some kind of strategy. And I say strategy, I don't mean it in a way of like trying to manipulate a situation, but like just different things. Like we were using brown light and we were using different things. We realized that there needed to be a level of healing in certain areas. Why are we having an issue right here in this particular situation? Where's the weak spot energetically inside us? And one thing as parents we need to really understand is, all parents, this has less to do with like highly intuitive, but the first thing that our children are going to go for is our energetic baggage. So if we have trauma, like let's just say like sexual trauma or whatever that's being passed down the family line, especially highly intuitive children, but all children, that is the first thing they're going to go for and unpack, because they cannot do their work or get over their overwhelm unless that package, that backpack of energy is not undone first. So as parents, if we can unpack those things and heal those things and work with those things, we are alleviating overwhelm for our highly intuitive children, or our children in general.
And can I add, Tara? Because that's a very, very good point, because children do naturally sense and pick up on things, even though you may not be talking to them about it. They can read and they can tell. And sometimes you may get questions about things that you may not be, not think that they sensed it. Now, I can just give a quick little example here is before Ethan was born, we had fertility issues, and I had a miscarriage about a year before Ethan was born. And one time he came to us and he said, he sat down with my husband and I, and he was like, why did you give my brother away? And we hadn't said anything to him about this, but he's like, I had a brother. What happened to my brother? Why did you give my brother away? Well, he's like 7, 8 years old. And we had to sit down and have that conversation with him at that point and say, yes, before you were born, mommy and daddy, we're going to have another child, but that child wasn't born into the world. And he felt a connection because he was saying, like, he could sense this energy being around him. So that's just an example of, they sense things and they can tell, they can pick up on that kind of an energy. And so sometimes you may have to have those conversations. You don't have to give them the whole full history of everything, but just enough for them to understand and get comfortable with it, so they don't hold on. They can work through it and hold on because they're wise. They just understand things beyond their years. And I just want to tap back into another thing that you said, which is also beautiful, is that parents, like you were saying about the bubble white light, you have to do, not every technique works for every child the same way. Or so what Tara is saying is you have to use what works for your child. You have to learn, be aware of different techniques and try different things, because different children respond in different ways to different techniques. So, and tools. So the more we can fill our parenting toolkit, our backpack, with a whole bunch of different techniques and learn things, the more we can have to try and see what works for our child. And just like you said, Tara, it could change over time. Something may work now, it may need to change later, but the more we educate ourselves and have these tools and techniques, then the more we're able to be that good resource for our child and have them try these different things to see what will work for them.
Yes, 1000%. Yes.
Yeah. So those great points you brought out.
Yes, because even let's just say crystals, right? I have one child that is that's where the gravitation goes right to that and understands it. And that's not where I gravitate towards, and nor does my other child. So, and it changes because they change, right? Like we're going into puberty and different things. They're changing so much. Another thing too was, we talked about this a little bit. I don't know if it was in the recording though. Coming into motherhood blew open my own abilities. As I went and healed more and more with my own pertaining around my own child and my own awareness and stuff like that, it just kept different levels of my abilities just started blowing open. And so I had to deal with that also, but it was also giving me context in some form of what my own children were going through. So that's something that I always want my parents to understand, is that this isn't just specific to them. It will, the more and more you work, it's going to present differently for you, but expect it in certain ways. So that's a point that I feel very strongly about. But going back to the story, we ended up pulling Dominic out for homeschooling and doing it that way because it just is what worked best for us. And it was just too overwhelming with the kids. And we felt very much it was more important for him, and the overwhelm into understanding him is to create thrive and his emotional regulation. And so we've chosen to homeschool for our kids, and they always have the option to go back to school, and they always have the option, we're very fluid. So, because they change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can I add, I know this is such a good conversation, and we're going to have a few more minutes. That I want to just to have you go through and talk about how you did the podcast. I want to add one other quick thing, like what you said. Absolutely. When women have children, hormonal changes for women, it does open up your abilities. And that's why I love the name of the podcast, Mother's Intuition, because definitely your intuition heightens when you have children and your hormones change. And it's the same, just to put this note out there too, children's hormones, when they hit puberty, their hormones change and their abilities could shift from what they had when they were much younger. It can change as they get older, and it will heighten around puberty time. But so just a note for parents to know that too. But Tara, tell us about how you started the podcast, because I want to open up for a few questions. How you started the podcast, how that came into it, and then just a little more because I love what you're doing with going around the country in the RV, and then tell a little bit about that too.
So the podcast came around in 2018, 2019, and that was because I had done all this work with different intuitives, and I had the most knowledge. I created this thing unintentionally, and I had so many connections, and it felt like not a waste to just that I just had it, but my main thing is that I never liked to push anything on anyone, but I knew that in some way the information needs to be available because there was very minimal to no resources when we were doing this. And I knew also too, as a parent, this was very almost a secretive thing. We're all kind of in the closet, even sometimes from our spouses, and we can sit in a car and listen and drive in the road and not get, even with YouTube, like you sit there and you're like still folding laundry and doing things. And I love listening to podcasts. So I was like, well, if they could just listen and I can interview the people who I worked with or the people that I knew, and I create a resource hub, then that will just allow them to take what they need or not need. And then it would end up blooming into so many other things after that with the podcast and working with families and stuff like that, because oftentimes we are very much in the closet and there's use in that. But then also too, ultimately we want to be secure enough and normalize the conversation, as you're saying. But I wanted the resources to be there. And I wanted people to be able to vet people in the way that they wanted to and see who connected or just had the opportunity to listen and kind of better understand maybe a grandchild or, to have that. Podcast doesn't ask anything from you. It doesn't ask you to pay anything. All it asks you to do is sit in your car and drive your commute, you can turn it off. So that's how that ended up happening. With the RV, we just started feeling we had done everything around our area. So we travel the US in an RV right now. We've done it for about a year and a half. We have done everything in our area, and homeschooling, we really wanted to see the world, and my husband was missing it. He, with the kids, and there was a level of needing to understand, there's so many different things, right? There were things in our life that was not aligned anymore, and we really needed to come to terms with that. Also too, for my children is, especially with Dominic, not so much Eve, she's kind of like a go-getter, she didn't care. Dominic had a more and more hard time with change, and I noticed he was hermiting more and more into the house. And I knew that if I had a small window to experience life, outside with him and help him navigate certain situations and literally energetically kind of put it in his map inside of himself so he could understand, when I go here, this is how it feels. This is, he wanted to keep, these are the things that I love. These are the things that I'd like to go see. And so it was our way of kind of helping him with his own emotional regulation and understanding how to navigate the world. And so we've been doing it about a year and a half. And then in that time, I've been able to like travel and educate and do different things with that too, which has been like, so many different things have come out of it, but just really wonderful, and meeting people. And
right. And that's beautiful. And that's an example of how meeting your child, doing what works best for them. And you have to just be aware and tap into it. And the fact that you realized homeschooling was best. And some kids are so sensitive, they have to be homeschooled, or they need to not be in, classroom size can be important because of being in large classrooms is just overwhelming. And so you really just have to tap into your child and look at what works for them. And so that's great what you're doing. And Tara is out helping she's another person advocating and helping putting information out about highly intuitive kids through her podcasts and through how she's educating parents and what she's doing. So I think this is really great. I mean, we could spend so much more time, talking about so much more around this. So I want to open up and let people ask a few questions, but I do want to just share one quick story because this just ties to, you talked about it from 5 years old, your son being young, but Tara and I were talking about this, and I had an interview, I did a reading for a client whose son was 14. And she happened to, I always say there's no coincidences. She opened up and started sharing. She's like, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but she started telling me about her 14-year-old son, that she was afraid. She's like, I think we're going to lose him. He's going to commit suicide.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. And I just was holding space for her. And as she opened up and started telling me about the characteristics of her son, it was her stepson. They grew up in religion. He and the dad weren't communicating at that point well, because he's 14. So he's in that teen tween time.
Yeah.
She just was describing him. And as she described different things about him, and he was shutting down and all these things. And I was like, he sounds like he has the characteristics of my son. And so I told her, I was like, go back and ask him these things. Does he see colors around people? Does he hear voices? Does he feel things or know things that others don't know? So I gave her like 5 questions. And she was like, well, thank you. I'll do that. And it was 2 days later, I get an email back from her. And she said, Ellen, thank you so much. You just saved my son's life. He opened up and shared that for years he's been experiencing this. He was afraid to tell anybody because he thought something was wrong with him.
Yeah.
And they were afraid that he was going to commit suicide. But what it did was it opened a dialogue in their family. And the father and then the stepmother was able to say, no, he's gifted in this way. And then the child had language and a context around it. And so it set a whole different trajectory for that child. So that's one reason why the resources like what Tara's doing with her podcast, and I encourage everybody to check that out, the Highly Intuitive Kids website. That website is out there because there are children who aren't supported. You're going to have teenagers. They can Google and they can come across a website and they'll be able to see information that may sound like them or look like them. And there's books and resources that they can go to the library, they can order. But that's why it's important to have these conversations and to be open about them. And I love and appreciate what Tara's doing here and being so open with her story, because this is going to help people, and even on the replay when they listen to it, hearing the different signs and what she experienced and how she's advocating and embracing this for her family and using this to help other families is really beautiful. So I'll just leave that there, but I wanted to share that story because you have her perspective from a 5-year-old. This is a story of a 14-year-old. This is real. This is out there. And so it's important that we as parents embrace, like Tara was saying, our intuitive ability so that we can better help. And we open the minds, that's what we're trying to do, of not only parents, but educators, other mental health professionals, social family advocates, get people to open up and start understanding. So with these different resources, websites, podcasts, we're doing that. And then we can start getting different support for our children. But I'm going to open the floor up for any questions. Anybody have questions that they would like to ask Tara? Because I love everything that she shared here today.
Okay. Can I say something about, sorry, Kim, can I say one thing about the teenager thing?
Yes, please add to it.
Just so so it's all mixed together. Teen years are so important in this puberty thing, just like with the motherhood and the hormones. Spiritually, so we have physical, spiritual, emotional. Anyway, just like we live a lifetime and we are born and we die, you do the same in the spiritual. And so teenage years, there is a spiritual death that happens. You're no longer a child. You are moving into your adulthood, per se. So they are actually experiencing a spiritual death inside, but it doesn't register. As in, they're thinking, I want to die. I want to die. They are dying. They're going to be reborn on the other side. But during that time, why abilities open up so much is because we are so connected as parents, and they're kind of in our auric field as children. And then as they get older, they move further out, and it's intentional for them to individuate, right? So what ends up happening is this massive dam breaks open when they're a teen, because they're supposed to be in their own space and their own adulthood, and they have their own experience. But with that, you get overwhelmed with your abilities, with energy, it's like being drowned a little bit before you swim. And then we as parents can sense them a bit less, but that's intentional. It's so they can become their own person. And eventually those things will rehook and rebalance. But that's like a conversation that they don't have as kids because it's not common knowledge. It was something that like Native Americans understood, and why there was such a process in walking teenagers into adulthood that we don't do with our teens now. So I always think that it's really important for people to understand that. So,
Yeah.
because I know a bunch of us are walking into teen years here, and like we can see it, right? In
Yeah.
ways.
It,
So
it's
it gets mixed up. They think that they're like depressive and want to commit suicide. We see that with our teens. And don't get me wrong, the world could do a little bit better of a job of making things, that they feel like they have something to work towards. But that is also occurring.
that's a good point, because they do experience a different flood with the hormone changes, different flood, and like abilities open up, they can change. And so with our highly intuitive teens, you want to be more sensitive to that, and aware of that as parents, and and just tap into that and know that. So it is a whole different change for our highly intuitive kids as they're going through puberty with these types of abilities.
Yeah.
So Kim, I'm going to let you you can unmute and ask your question.
Thanks, Ellen. So I wanted to just ask or bring up, because I'm seeing a huge connection here, and that is what you described with your son, right? 12 or however many therapists that you took him through, even your own pre and postpartum depression that you yourself went through. My younger sister, has a lot of abilities, and her son, the youngest, she has 3 kids, so a son, a daughter, and then another son. And her third son was very similar to what you described with your son. When he was in 1st grade, he would put on his backpack and sit in the middle of the room and say, I'm just going to wait here till my mom comes to get me. Because he did not want to, he wouldn't take off his coat, nothing. And at one point, the school called my sister and said, we think you need to take him to, our local hospital is Shepherd Pratt, which is for, mental issues. I work at the University of Maryland, and I see and have seen, this is the connection I'm making, a huge change in people being willing to not just talk about psychological issues that they're dealing with, right? But a huge change in the students being willing to openly discuss and talk about these things. And these are kids who are in what you just described, right? They start out 17, 18 at college, they're 22 when they leave. They're going through the whole separation from their parents and becoming their own selves. But I almost wonder, since the pandemic and this huge door opening related to mental health, if there's a huge amount of these people with depression, anxiety, etc., who actually have these abilities, and it's all under the mask of the mental health realm.
Yes.
Mhm.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Don't get me wrong, though. I will not take away that there are not people who have mental health situations.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I will not remove that, because that is truly a thing. But absolutely. I mean, you even look in the schools and stuff, is how come our kids keep getting diagnosed with so many, we have more and more and more children with diagnoses, yet nobody's looking at the environment that they're in. And I mean, I think that's a pretty honest thing.
Mhm.
But also, trauma is a contributing factor to opening up of abilities and the creation of abilities. You'll notice that there's a lot of children with abilities that is created surely out of being, in a not so great home, where they have to literally work on their abilities. It's important evolutionarily, just scientifically, why they need to be on, because if they don't tap into how a family member is going to be when they walk in, that's going to be a problem and going to be a dangerous situation. So it's important for their survival to tap in. The other thing too with COVID and everything like that was, yes, we were locked down. And so we have all these, now we can't not face so many things that occurred. But I mean, it goes bigger into this, is we as a humanity kept pushing away all this healing that needed to happen. And so COVID happened. It's like kind of like creating disease in your body. You keep pushing something away, you're going to literally materialize disease. But this is like an overwhelming situation. And so it came into the physical. And so it's like, now you have to deal with me. And now you have to start becoming aware inside, and there's no party for you to go to or job you have to go to. And things were worked on in that time. And that's another reason why people can't go back to what they are doing. But yes, I think we're just going to see more and more, because I will say the generations coming up are slowing down and taking the time to heal. And so now we're making room for more children. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons, but we're making room for more children with more abilities to come in, because also too, humanity needs it and it's time. So we're seeing the spike. It's kind of like they're already here. We're not in a situation where it's commonly known. So we're right here. So yes, I full blown agree with you, Kim. It's just a matter now as parents with us is, how far are we willing to go to support them? And yeah.
And I'm going to add a quick thing to that. And I want to be respectful of people's time because we're a little
Sure.
over, but one of the things I'm going to 100% agree with what Tara said. And I'm going to also add to this, for the people who are sensitive, whether it's the children and adults with what happened with COVID, our empaths can feel.
Yes.
They can feel all the death and the sadness and the mourning and the sorrow. So the children dealing with anxiety and depression, not just children, but even the adults in the schools, you're recognizing that at the university level, Kim, but even at the learning years, elementary through high school, these kids are experiencing, they felt the impact of that. And I don't think people understand the magnitude of how they've taken on like this collective sorrow and mourning, and they feel that, and it is translating into anxiety and depression. And we have to have these conversations to normalize it, but teach them how to, also learn what's theirs and what's not, how to manage and regulate what they're taking in. But it starts with these conversations. And you're absolutely right, Tara. This is a generation. I introduced a book in the community just the other day, Generation Intuitive. That's what's coming in now. These younger kids are more connected and they're staying connected. And we have to learn how to parent them differently, educate them differently, help teach them to honor themselves differently. And it starts with these open conversations so we can help work with them. So this is just, Tara, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much. Let's see if there's we're already over. I want to be respectful of people's time. If there's one other question, if not, I'm going to thank Tara because this has been really great. Anybody else have a question besides Kim? Okay, that tells me that there's been a lot to take in because there were so many good nuggets of information that you dropped here. So Tara, tell the group where they can find your podcasts.
I'm on any podcasting platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, you name it. And it's just A Mother's Intuition. And then same for Instagram and Facebook. Just normal. I'm easy. Thank goodness. It's just one thing. The hardest thing is to spell intuition. There's so many I's.
And that's great. And I encourage people to go check out her information and listen, that's a podcast that's out there. And there's more and more since what you experienced, Tara, and what we experienced with our son, there's been more information coming available, more people putting podcast information out. We want to highlight some good ones that we know about. And so A Mother's Intuition is one we definitely want people to go check out, with good information that she's accumulated through the years and the experts and resources that she's found on her journey that's out there and that's available as well. And then you always have our website here, the Highly Intuitive Kids website, and the resources that we've got there, books and information. Can't stress enough that parents educating yourselves,
Yes.
really, really educating yourself, learning tools and techniques that are going to help you to help your child. You help yourselves first, because we're all intuitive, and then you'll naturally be able to help and support your child better. So thank you, Tara.
Thank you so much for having me. I love this.
you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
this
And
was a
thank you for
great
making
conversation.
this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. So with that, we'll wrap this up, and we will definitely look forward to talking with you some more in the future, Tara. Thank you.
Thank you.